Welcome back to Jadonna Live, a weekly show where you can show up as you are, ask better questions, and be encouraged to think critically. Guys, I can't even remember the last time I recorded a podcast. It just felt so long. I have been a bit under the weather and I'm just void of energy lately. I have been indulging in Love Island. I am a Love Island addict. If you ask me how many episodes I have seen in the past month, the answer is yes. That is how many I have seen. I am a sheer addict. I have been watching season 6 simultaneously with the current season, season 7. I am 100% team Nicolandria. I feel cursed because, not really, but last time I announced something I was really excited for, which was the Pacers game, the day I was recording, and I was like, the championship's tonight, and then the Pacers lost. I'm just like getting PTSD from that. I don't think Nick and Alandria will win tonight, but I just hope they don't get 4th place. So anyway, the finale of Love Island is tonight. Very excited. And outside of that, literally, I've been doing nothing but hanging out with myself at my house and finally recorded an episode today. So I'll bring this up again at the end, but I will be going bi-weekly. And yeah, it's just an adjustment that needs to be made for now, and that's a-okay. So let's go ahead and get into some new affirmations for the month of July. And yeah, great to see y'all. All right, now it is time for the affirmations segment. I conduct an affirmation segment monthly. And the purpose is to speak life into your body, your mind, and to help yourself reach your goals based on training your subconscious mind. So if you could go ahead and plant your feet firmly on the ground, raise your shoulders, breath. I'm going to keep it short and sweet for July. That's all I got in me, which is, perfectly fine. I didn't even say this. So what you're going to do, I'm going to recite a line at a time. I will recite each line twice. Feel free to, on the second time I recite it, say it with me out loud or reflect on it in your mind. This is a shout out to people who are just doing their best they can right now. I show up as I can today. I show up as I can today. I am proud of what I have to offer. I am proud of what I have to offer. I accept what I have to offer today as enough. I accept what I have to offer today as enough. I relent to today's energy level. I relent to today's energy level. I rest when my body needs it. I rest when my body needs it. I do not force productivity. I do not force productivity. I listen to what my body requires. I listen to what my body requires. Okie dokie. Let's move on. All right. Welcome to today's mini moment segment. And mini moment segments are discussions I have surrounding topics that have just been on my mind lately. And today's topic happens to deal with artificial intelligence. So many of us are using it now. If you aren't, I'm pretty surprised just because it's become hella popular. Specifically, I feel like in the past year and a half, 2 years with just like daily use, but it has been on my mind. And I want to say in the spring, maybe even earlier this year, I began to use it very, very consistently and to just kind of like spitball stuff with instead of discussing with my husband or friends because everyone's short on time, just going straight to ChatGPT and saying, hey, does this make sense? Does this make sense? What do you think about this? Whether for home projects or work projects. So I realized I was using it a decent amount, and over the course of time, started learning more about the significant environmental impacts that it can have. And I was like, oh, I had no idea. Maybe I should be using it a little less, or, as I like to challenge us, a little more consciously than I am. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And the point of this isn't necessarily to steer anyone any specific direction. Actually, that's not true. I do always encourage us to be, mindfully living as best we can. So if that means reducing our usage of certain things, then yeah, that makes sense. But I do think we all have to come up with ways in which that works for us. So excited to kind of get into this, and yeah, would love to hear from you all. So let's just kind of jump into it. So like I said, I would use it a lot for podcast production assistance and like crafting questions for interviewees after I did research and just kind of inputting stuff and saying, what about this? Can we tailor this question more? That sort of thing. And realized over time I didn't want to be doing that. And I'll kind of get into that a little bit later. So what I want to kick us off with today is by really pointing out the significant impacts of artificial intelligence on our physical environments first. And so we're going to start out with AI training. So AI is trained in order to work effectively and efficiently. It requires human feedback, supervised learning, and being fed large data sets on the internet to acquire more information to then infer from that information. So the training for a single AI model, let's take ChatGPT, for example, can consume thousands of hours of electricity and emit hundreds of tons of carbon. And sometimes stats like that can be kind of hard to visualize. So just equate that to, so the training for a single AI model, equate that to roughly the annual carbon emissions of hundreds of households in the United States just to train one single AI model like ChatGPT. At first I was like, that's bad. But then I was like, well, ChatGPT is a very involved model. So while that is a lot of carbon emissions, I was like, to me, it kind of made sense. I know there are different models, different numbers for various models as well. But I think kind of the point behind that is models aren't just like created and remain stagnant. If you're following AI research and data, models evolve very often. There's, model 1 and then, or there's version 1 and then 2, then 3, then 3.5. And so just kind of keeping that in mind, if it sounds not as significant to remember that like this is being developed upon all the time. So if we really think about the annual carbon emissions of hundreds of households in the United States over and over and over and over and over and over and over, you're like, oh, okay, I get that. So training these models also uses copious amounts of water, specifically fresh water, evaporated into the atmosphere. And the reason that is needed is because these models are trained in data centers, and these data centers, these big technological infrastructures emit a lot of heat. And so what needs to happen in these data centers where you have to cool them down so they don't overheat. And so what happens is hot air from the servers is actually passed through these like water saturated pads, so the air is kind of going in between, or misted water is applied to cool down the systems in the data centers. And so the data centers cool down as that water is evaporating. And of course, in your mind, you're like, oh, great, we don't want these data centers to overheat. We don't want fires. We don't want, any issues. But this does limit some of those fresh water sources that are around these areas. So it's kind of like, well, if these data centers weren't around to really consume or to produce that much heat in the first place, they wouldn't need to then utilize that much water to cool them off. And data centers are a hot topic in the AI world. Also in the technological world, period, and we'll kind of get to that. But data centers for AI contribute to high electricity usage, local air pollution, not so, water quality degradation. Again, you're using a lot of it, but then production of solid waste, hazardous materials. We talked about higher carbon emissions. And so what happens is where these centers are located can directly impact resident health. The people around these aren't just like, oh, cool, there's a data center over there. Great. Glad it's doing what it's doing. No. And that's another reason why I wanted to chat today. Nothing is just like created and void of any impact on people. These data centers are in communities that are then contributing to high ozone levels, which then negatively impact respiratory development and then can also contribute to premature death. Obviously, that's a worst case scenario. However, it's important to understand what these can contribute to. And so one of my besties sent me a handful of resources when I let her know I was preparing for this. Thanks, Chelsea. And so one of the videos she sent me was one that's been swirling around the internet. So some of you have maybe seen it. It's by the organization More Perfect Union, which is an education, advocacy, and journalism nonprofit with a mission to build power for the working class. And so they produced a video interviewing homeowners that lived next to these data centers, and specifically in Georgia, which, if you didn't know, was a hotspot for data center development due to data center tax breaks amongst other benefits. But these residents spoke directly to these, data center impacts on their homes, their water pressure, their water quality, their air, their pollution, and more. They were made aware that these data centers were being built, and that's something that some of the interviewers and some of the advocates of the data centers kept making sure to say. And I'll link this video in the show notes so you can see. All my sources won't be in the show notes. But the advocates of the data centers were like, we let these people know these data centers would be here. They were made aware that this would happen. They just weren't aware that the negative impacts would happen to them specifically. So they didn't care then. But now that they are being significantly impacted on a personal level, they care a little bit more. There's so many issues with that statement, but I hate to say that I understand it as well. That happens with so many of us. It's like we don't care until it impacts us, and that's another reason why I wanted to bring this up today. So yeah, the worst part about watching that video for me was how unsurprised I was by the negative impacts being specifically in these like rural areas, because that is where, these tech companies are able to purchase these acres and acres and acres of land that no one is around. And the research shows, unfortunately, that AI's environmental inequalities align with global socioeconomic environmental inequalities. Weird. So, of course, these rural areas, these low-income areas are going to be wearing the brunt of these negative impacts from AI advancement. And so that's something else to be aware of, especially if you don't live in the inner city or a rural environment. So let's go ahead and kind of break this down to the kind of individual level again. Let's say in your own AI usage, let's say you asked AI 15 questions and requested 10 images and 3 5-second videos. Well, researchers say that would use roughly 2.9 kilowatt hours of electricity. That doesn't do much for me, but when they said that is the equivalent of running a microwave for over 3.5 hours, I was like, 15 questions and 10 images and 3 5-second videos. Like, that is a decent amount to ask AI for, but not really with how fast it would spit that out. Like 15 questions, let's say I'm doing an interview for a podcast. I mean, I do a minimum of 10. So I add 5 more, request 10, very simple images from it, and 3 5-second videos, equivalent to running a microwave for 3.5 hours. And to create a 5-second video, that's one 5-second video with a newer AI model, that would use about 3.4 million joules, which is more than 700 times the energy required to generate a high quality image. I've heard of joules, but I'm like, okay, again, give me something like practical to really understand what that looks like. And so creating a 5-second video would be the equivalent of running a microwave for over an hour. So just kind of being aware that even these little quick questions that we're asking, when we could maybe think of something ourselves, or maybe even like search it in Google, being like, okay, this is making an impact. I think my initial thought while I was reading all this is, how is the start of AI that much different? Or the consumption, how is AI's consumption that significantly different from the internet when it first came about? Like, are we very aware of AI's energy consumption and water consumption right now just because it's new, when the internet did something similar when it first came about? And yeah, that was just something I was very curious about, because our social media, our web, the hosts that hold our websites, our cloud storage, all of those need data centers. And those are built, data centers are built constantly for those purposes. Amazon alone has more than 100 data centers worldwide, and each data center itself has around 50,000 servers involved. And so I'm like, okay, are we making AI the bad guy when like it's a bigger kind of internet technology issue? But where AI stands out from the internet we're used to is in its ability to infer. So AI creates conclusions and deduces information based on inference. It's not just spouting out it's not just like spouting things out. It's using the information it acquires to then produce and contribute. And so in contrast to the training that happens, which is conducted once or in intervals, like for AI, when you start using AI to infer, it's occurring that inference is occurring on a what is the best word to even use? It's a conglomerating all the information, and then it's reassessing it again and again and again. Let's say you put 50 lines of content in AI, and then you ask one question from it, and then you go back and you ask a second question. Well, it's going to use all of the information you provided the first time, the second time. Let's say you do this 50 more times. It's aggregating it and getting smarter and using that data to infer better and better and better and better every single time. So research estimates and suggests that it's that inference piece that can account for up to 90% of a model's total life cycle energy use. And so that's where the energy AI uses is going to be different than just like your standard web search, where it's just spouting out what's there, versus, people using AI to tell them what to do in their relationship with their boyfriend based on what AI knows about them. You can get articles that are spout out to you on the internet, but you're not going to be told specifically what to do in your situation like you will with AI. Again, it's the difference between just spouting out what's there and spouting out a conclusion and a prediction. That's what really brings and consumes the most energy. So, interestingly enough, there was also some research conducted and published by the Future of Life Institute, which is a nonprofit that aims to reduce global catastrophic risks. They did an open letter in 2023 calling for a pause on large-scale AI models with the super prominent voices in tech. Kind of the point was they really wanted to bring together a panel of experts who evaluate technology companies, and they evaluate companies in 6 very key areas, including risk assessment, current harms, safety frameworks, existential safety strategy. What an interesting framework. Governance and accountability, and transparency and communication. And so they created that framework and then built a report to assess a handful of AI companies against that framework to kind of give them a score and a grade based on where they really stood with those things. And so they considered potential harms ranging from carbon emissions to, and this one's light and fun, the risk of an AI system going rogue, So they rated Meta, Elon Musk's AI company, the company behind OpenAI, ChatGPT, Google, DeepMind, and Anthropic, which is Claude, which a lot of people use for writing. And so based on their framework, again, risk assessment, current harms, safety frameworks, existential safety strategy, governance and accountability, and transparency and communication, Meta ranked, and again, this will be linked in the show notes, Meta ranked an F. I feel like I'm just so Elon Musk's company, a D-, company behind OpenAI, ChatGPT, a D+, Google, DeepMind, a D+, and Claude's company received a C. So again, that's something that you'd really want to look through the report to kind of assess like all the very specific aspects to that. But from knowing that big factors were the carbon emissions and the risk of AI, just kind of going rogue. And I just hear that as it using your information maybe in a way you weren't anticipating, or developing results that maybe aren't with integrity. Just doesn't feel great. So in terms of what we do with some of this information, I have chosen, just because things are still so murky, I'm like, okay, I still want to engage with artificial intelligence because it's 2025. Like, I don't believe that it's something that is smart to be ignorant about and have no relationship with or experience with whatsoever. Those times are behind us. You do not, I just don't think like fear and avoidance is the way to go about it. But I do think being more aware of your usage and the systems you're using, I will link an article below. Anyway, I'll get into that later. I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself. I don't know that I would suggest you reduce your AI usage entirely and like stop using it altogether. What you do with this information is really up to you. But in light of this information being more prominent to me in the past couple months, I have significantly reduced my AI usage. I started to realize when I was using it more that I was also using my brain less. And for me, that just made me a bit uncomfortable because I'm like, I have to stay sharp. I have to be able to further lean in and further develop my skill sets. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. And so I didn't want an AI shortcut. However, I still find using AI for like templates, kind of for like the project management piece of things, to be helpful. But even then, sometimes I'm like, you think about what makes sense and try to implement that. So there is a template that I used AI for a couple months ago. So I do use that because it's something I can have AI make once and then use over and over. Just really trying to reduce one-time use for things. It spits out as much as possible. I'll also be kind of based on this research, trying to use AI to infer less. So I guess asking it to aggregate things I submit to it versus having it come up with something completely on its own, just to kind of reduce the amount of energy. Yeah, just being aware that certain models use more energy than others, emit more carbon emissions than others. So being aware of that and adjusting accordingly. Maybe trying to use Claude, even though it's still rated C. And again, there are various factors in that rating, but according to its peers, with it rated higher in its various ethical components. And I think something for me, just based on that video I saw about people in certain areas being impacted, is also just keeping an ear out for legislation where I live regarding data centers. Like, it's something you don't think about because we always talk about we talk about like the cloud and our technology being, we're so removed from this stuff. And yeah, the cloud is like the size of Costco, you know, in states across the country with servers inside using your fresh water, you know. So it's like, even me, I'm like, oh, let me check my cloud subscriptions, and like I just have stuff to have it. I'm like, oh, I'll just store it on the cloud. It's like, okay, do I need like a physical photo book again for some stuff? Like just trying to be, you don't have to change your whole life, but just trying to be a little bit more aware. And also keeping an ear out for when tech companies are knocking on the door, especially if you're near a rural area and are purchasing acres of land that you know aren't for like their employee workspaces, and just kind of thinking critically, like, okay, if they're buying that much land, what is that for? Doing some research, maybe going to a public hearing, just trying to stay a little bit more aware of what's going on right next to you, because until it does impact you and it's too late to make, you know, at least it's too dire to do something significant, that's maybe a way you can at least be aware. And I will link a Newsweek article that compares AI options with compatibility scores, so you can kind of check some of the systems you're using through that tool. I looked at that tool. There are a handful I just like had never heard of. I use mostly just ChatGPT. I don't even think I saw that on that list. So maybe something that's less for like folks who barely use AI at all, and more so for people who are familiar with a variety of different systems. And just all in all, I mean, apparently there's just a lot more insight needed over this industry. A lot of in-house evaluations are apparently occurring. So hopefully with time, we can witness more positive evolution. However, according to research, current environmental impacts are only expected to escalate considerably, especially by 2026, which is just next year. So AI, it's not going anywhere anytime soon, and just something for us to kind of be aware of. So hopefully that was interesting, scratched a little nugget of your brain. And yeah, let's move on. Thank you all for bearing with me and joining me on this episode of Jadonna Live. It's been great to talk to you. If you have any questions or comments related to the episode, please reach out at jadonnalive@gmail.com. I would love to hear your thoughts about kind of AI and any articles you looked at that were helpful, or any other thoughts that you just want to share. And I will be, this day forward, doing the podcast bi-weekly. I just need some buffer time in between, and weekly is just kind of not an option anymore right now. So look forward to that. There will not be an episode next week, but there will be one the week after. And just so you know exactly when that Monday is, so you're not holding your breath, as I would so hate, this episode will come out on the 14th. So the next one will come out on the 28th. So in the meantime, take it easy, breathe deeply, and keep doing what you do. I will chat with you next week. Same time, same vibe. Bye.